Hi, my name is LaRhonda Julien. Welcome to the IEEE Women in Engineering podcast, We Rise Together, charting pathways to STEM careers where we share leadership insights, career advancement strategies, and innovative technology topics. Our very special guest today is Kim Meninger. Kim is a keynote speaker, leadership coach, and consultant. She specializes in helping high-performing leaders lead confidently and achieve more. Kim, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, LaRhonda. It's wonderful to be here.
You're very welcome. IEEE's core values include encouraging education, investing in training and development to enhance capabilities, and empowering individuals to make a positive difference. We hope to provide those benefits to our membership and listenership by having guests on the podcast, such as yourself, who have worked with well-respected companies in fast-paced environments where success is expected. You have retired, if you will, from corporate life and took the lessons that you learned over your career and you've poured them into your clients. Would you tell us when you first knew that that was what you wanted to do?
I actually always wanted to be a therapist. So I studied psychology when I was an undergraduate in college, and I stumbled into high tech right around the peak of the dot-com boom. And I was, really good at the people side of the business because that psychology degree served me in my communication, influence, relationship building skills. I hate to admit in this forum that the technology was the really intimidating part for me. I had a lot of imposter syndrome. I felt like I was often in conversations where people were speaking a foreign language that I didn't understand. I was able to build my confidence and work through that. But what I was always drawn to was the people development side of the work. I managed a team of younger professionals for some time. I really loved getting to know them and understanding what their strengths were, how to help them advance their careers. And so I went on maternity leave with my older son 16 years ago and decided it was time for me to think differently about my career. And that's when I started to do sort of an informal audit or inventory around what did I most enjoy and where was I adding the most value. And that's how I ended up where I am today.
That's a great story, Kim. You say that you want to make it easier to be a human at work. You have a free weekly discussion group named Leading Humans where you help to do just that. How has the way you tackle leading humans changed with the rapid pace of technology?
I am a big believer that we are capable of learning very quickly. It's part of our biological wiring. People are really adaptable, and we've learned that through a lot of the changes that have happened in recent times with everything that happened during the pandemic and the rise of AI. I think where we still get stuck is the mindset piece. We still feel easily threatened by unpredictability. We still second guess ourselves when we're watching other people learn around us and feeling like they're farther ahead than we are, or we should be able to do this better or differently than we're doing it today. So I try to look at it through the lens of what is the mindset challenge that's keeping us from being as productive, as confident, as effective as we could be.
You mentioned imposter syndrome earlier. Two questions. First, explain imposter syndrome, and then tell us how AI has influenced imposter syndrome at work.
Mm. So, imposter syndrome is that sense that despite our record of success, we're doing really well, we're getting great feedback, meeting all the goals on paper, there's still this feeling that we're a fraud, that someone is going to find out that we're not as good as they think we are. And so, it's this level of anxiety that's kind of running in the background, and it peaks in different types of situations depending on where we are. So it tends to strike high achievers more often. It strikes in competitive environments, and it also affects people who feel different from the majority culture around them, which is why we tend to see it more often in women, people of color, anybody who feels, again, different from people around them. So even introverts in a highly extroverted environment may be more prone to imposter syndrome. Now, AI is interesting because on the one hand, it is this huge culture change and technological change that we're all grappling with and learning to adapt to. But I think in some ways it's leveled the playing field a bit because we're all in this together, right? I think we all sort of feel like we're coming to it at the same time. And so it doesn't have that same feeling of, oh, somebody else is 20 years ahead of me. It also is interesting because you can use it for support. And so I often recommend that people who struggle with imposter syndrome use it as a means of reframing some of their thoughts or finding more efficient ways to do things if they're getting stuck in perfectionistic habits. And so it is both a trigger and a support resource at the same time.
I love that. There is a poem titled The Journey by Mary Oliver. It reads, "One day you finally knew what you had to do and began, though the voices around you kept shouting their bad advice." And it goes on from there. What good advice do you have for people suffering from imposter syndrome?
I always think about imposter syndrome as an expression of fear. So we tend to treat it as this separate thing that requires a pep talk or that we just need to knock, snap out of it, right? When in actuality, when imposter syndrome creeps in, what it's telling us is that we are on the cusp of doing something outside of our comfort zones. And that's really important because that is where growth happens. So if we reframe what it means to struggle with imposter syndrome, that it's not a personal flaw, a character deficiency, it's not a disorder. It's really a signal that we are about to grow. We can look at that for what it is, look at it as fear, not fact. And so I like to remind myself of that when I continue to feel that today, all these years later, and helping so many people through it is okay, I know what's happening here. This is my brain trying to keep me safe. This is my brain's way of saying, hey, that there's a dangerous unknown that you're about to step into. And then to instead say, okay, what is the action I can take here to feel safer, to help me manage through this? Or how can I update the story I'm telling myself so that it doesn't feel as scary or as stressful as it might? And that has helped me tremendously.
Thank you for that. You mentioned earlier that women in minorities, and I'll add to that other people in underserved communities, have a higher rate of imposter syndrome than most. According to the Department of Labor, approximately 60% of women are social scientists. 45% of women are in math and technology occupations, and 16% of women are engineers. Now, going back to that earlier point, we know that women in male-dominated fields and members of underrepresented groups experience imposter syndrome at higher rates. How does that impact their career growth?
It's a good question. And I think there are two parts to this. So there's the internal narrative that we hold when we find ourselves in spaces where we feel different from other people, because it's kind of hardwired for us to want to feel included, for us to want to feel like we belong to the systems that we are part of. And if we see other people doing things differently than we do, we start to question ourselves. But there's also the external component to this, which is how the people around us include us. Do they respect our contributions? Are we invited into the conversation? Are we made to feel psychologically safe to be part of this? And if that piece is missing, it's no amount of internal mindset management is going to change that. So I think it's really about how do we diagnose the problem here? How much of this is coming from my own insecurities and anxieties, and that's to be expected as a human versus recognizing maybe I'm not in the environment that's going to allow me to be my best self and do my best work. Because if you do find yourself in that kind of environment where you don't feel safe, you don't feel respected, it absolutely will have an impact on your career.
You mentioned psychological safety, a term that was coined by Amy Edmondson. Would you expand on that a little bit? I know you hit on it in certain spots on your reply, but just define it for our audience, for people who may not be as familiar with it.
Sure. So I'll paraphrase Emmy Edmondson's definition, which is a belief that we will not be punished or humiliated for asking a question, challenging the status quo, making a mistake, right? And it's not, sometimes people think of it as it's being overly nice or we tiptoe around each other. It's actually quite the opposite. It's rooted in respect and accountability. So if we create an environment where people are respected and we can safely make mistakes and speak up with each other, we actually have more disagreement. It's just a healthier form of disagreement. We're able to debate ideas. We're able to take advantage of the diversity around us rather than shrinking and being afraid to speak up.
Perfect. Thank you. I watched an interview once with a female executive who had stage 4 cancer. She would get up in the morning every day, she would get dressed, she'd get her kids ready for school before she went in for her treatments. And she did it all with a positive attitude, no matter how she was feeling that day. In the interview, she shared that how she showed up was how her kids were going to show up. Have you seen this experience transfer into the work environment?
Absolutely. And what a heartbreaking story. I mean, that's very inspirational the way she handled it, but oof, I feel for her. And that to me ties to when I think about how we manage ourselves in these very kind of chaotic workspaces where we're often triggered by different forces, is there's the fear piece, which is kind of biological, and then there's the values piece where we can ask ourselves at any given moment, who do I want to be? How do I want to show up today? How do I want people to experience me? And that requires a level of intentionality that doesn't just happen. Many of our behaviors are reactive because we're moving at a rapid pace and we are not taking the time to be thoughtful about what we're doing. And when that happens, it affects everybody around us, especially for people managers. They don't realize the way their teams are really tuning in to their behaviors, to their messaging, to everything that they're doing. And so if we take the time to periodically pause, especially if we feel like we've been triggered in some way, and really take some deep breaths, really think about, how do I want to show up right now? How do I want to respond? And that might mean I need to remove myself from this situation for a little bit so that I can, bring my temperature down and come back in a better state of mind, that people around us will adopt that energy as well.
Kim, you've been quoted as saying, even the most capable people struggle to access their best selves in the moments that matter most. How are you helping high achievers overcome challenges at home and at work?
The simplest way that I think about it is really that pause button. And I often recommend that we take time to observe ourselves in action and notice the way our body responds when our fight or flight response kicks in, right? That's what we're really talking about, that reactive mode. Because when you know your body really well, and this is something that I have learned because I'm somebody who has struggled with anxiety for so much of my life, I know my fight or flight response really well, that I see that as your body's check engine light, right? The check engine light goes off in these various situations that trigger you. And if you know that the check engine light has gone off, it's a signal to slow down, to pause, to breathe, to really do what you need to do to get yourself back into a more neutral state. And so if we just think differently or more consciously about how we're responding to the environment around us, it gives us more choices for how we respond. And then again, that affects how other people respond to us, and it has almost a contagious effect.
Kim, it's your first day on the job. How do you show up?
Very curiously. I lead with curiosity. Maybe that means I'm a bit of a nosy person, but I have learned that nobody else expects you to have fully mastered the role on day one. You're the only one putting that pressure on yourself. And of course, we want to put our best foot forward. Of course, we want to make sure that we're, getting up to speed as quickly as possible. But that first day in particular is a day for you to learn, for you to introduce yourself to other people, gain as much insight into the culture, the team, the job as possible. So because you can't know anything until you learn it. And so to just adopt that learning mindset, that growth mindset can go a long way in alleviating some of the stress and self-doubt.
Now, I'm not going to let you off the hook about the growth mindset. We're going to come back to that later. But because you mentioned leading with curiosity, you have developed a leads framework that you use to support your client development. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yes. So it's a 5-part system for how to manage ourselves under pressure, as we've been talking about. It's an acronym. So the L is to listen to your body, as I just mentioned, that check engine light. E is to examine your triggers, to really think about what just happened here. This didn't happen randomly. I'm responding to something. When we understand our triggers, we can better anticipate them. A is to align with your values. And that goes back to what we were talking about, of thinking about, who do I want to be? How do I want to show up in this environment? And then the D is really about developing a plan. When you know yourself really well, you can predict when these types of triggers are likely to show up, and to really think about, what will I do when I get in the room and this happens? What tools will I bring with me? What preparation will I do? How will I manage myself in that moment? And what will I do afterwards if it doesn't go according to plan? And then finally, S is support others. So once we have really practice this for ourselves, how do we bring it to other people as well, so that we can collectively support each other in managing these responses?
You're the leader at work. What are some tips to help leaders build trust with their teams?
Be vulnerable, right? And I know Brene Brown is a big proponent of vulnerability, and sometimes people confuse vulnerability with, sort of being too open, sharing too much information. This isn't about, dumping all of your emotional baggage on your team, but humanizing those relationships is critical, because, like I said, when you're the person in power, people are looking at you through a different lens. So your ability to normalize the stress that's involved in doing the work under chaotic or changing conditions, to be able to acknowledge that sometimes you feel nervous as well, or you've made a mistake. If you own a mistake and you hold yourself accountable, you give permission to other people to do that as well. So instead of putting on that performative mask and trying to look like you know everything, to really be willing to let people see the human side of you.
That feeds right into the next question that I wanted to ask you. Overthinking, overcompensating, and overfunctioning used to be a badge of honor. These reactive habits, as you call them, used to be that symbol of honor. It showed that someone was smart, decisive, and committed to achieving their goals at all costs. I'm sure you've heard all of these things before. But today, we see the real consequences of those behaviors in stress, burnout, and one of the newest terms, quiet quitting. What other ways have you seen the fallout of these behaviors?
These behaviors are insidious for the reasons that you described, because they do still have this air of like honor to them, especially something like perfectionism. We think that uh oh, I'm a perfectionist, we joke about it, but if you think about the fact that realistically we only have a fixed amount of time and energy, and that time and energy has to be used for all of our responsibilities, all of the behaviors that we want to put into place at any given time. And if we're spending that energy and time on something that's really not worth the effort, we're depriving ourselves of that time and energy for things that really matter. And so, to your point, burnout is on the rise, it's an epidemic. If you're losing sleep because you're worried about the meeting that's going to happen tomorrow, your physical health is now going to be at risk. If you are not present with your loved ones because you're distracted thinking about the work problems that you may face the next day, your relationships will start to suffer. So there is absolutely a broad ripple effect across your life, not just professionally, but personally, of these overcompensating behaviors.
I couldn't agree more, especially where that burnout and stress is concerned. Those two behaviors, I'll call them, lead to obesity, diabetes, a number of different issues that people probably aren't thinking about in the moment. They just have their mind set on reaching that goal no matter what. To that end, what are some ways or some things that you would recommend to your clients to ground themselves and hopefully begin to get around those overthinking, overcompensating, and overfunctioning behaviors?
Part of this comes back to intentionality as well. And I think sometimes we are creatures of habit and we do this because it's the way we've always done it. And maybe it did serve us briefly when we were in college or at some other point in our lives. But right now, it's about asking questions that bring your attention to it and present alternatives that may be more effective for you. So I would ask myself questions like, is this really the best use of my time right now? Or what is good enough in this moment? And one thing that I will also recommend here is a lot of times overcompensating comes from pressure to be and do everything yourself. So, as uncomfortable as it may feel, getting used to asking for help is a big part of managing a lot of what we're talking about, whether it's imposter syndrome, overcompensating, a lot of the anxiety that because when we isolate ourselves from support resources, the anxiety escalates and the pressure rises. But once we start to ask for help and talk to other people, we realize, oh, maybe I don't have to make this, perfect, or maybe I don't need to spend 15 hours on this hour project, or maybe there's a better way to do it. So, really, not trying to go it alone is a big part of it.
You mentioned earlier, and I said that I would circle back to it, growth mindset. You talked about Brene Brown. You talked about intentionality. All of those things speak to me because I am also degreed in psychology. It is my passion. However, for our listeners on the call, please share with them a little bit about growth mindset and all of the things that we've talked about today. In my estimation, if you adopt that growth mindset, you can begin to overcome some of them.
Yes, I have found growth mindset to be an incredibly powerful tool for what we're talking about. And I like to think about it as in contrast to a fixed mindset, where we essentially believe that we're born with what we're capable, that we have these inherent limitations to what's possible. So, if, for example, I'm struggling in math, I may conclude that I'm simply not a math person. I'm just not capable of getting any better at this. And that becomes the upper limit on my potential. Whereas if I have a growth mindset, I believe that I'm in control of my own destiny, that if I work harder, if I practice, if I access different resources, I can get better. And having a growth mindset makes us less susceptible to some of these other challenges that we're talking about. And one of the things that I often try to remind people when we talk about the growth mindset is that none of the strengths and capabilities that we take for granted were we born with, right? Some of the strengths that we breeze past were once scary, new, or hard. I mean, even just the ability to walk, drive, speak, all of those were once new to us. And so anything that we encounter that intimidates us, or that we start to question, oh, can I learn this? Of course you can learn it. You've been learning your whole life. You didn't get to where you are today without that. So I think just reframing or keeping in perspective that bigger picture can be really helpful.
Now, we've talked a little bit, or a lot a bit, about imposter syndrome and now growth mindset. Can you share with us some of the similarities and differences in how they might show up in women versus men?
Yes. So a lot of this comes down to social conditioning. And we often think of imposter syndrome as affecting only women or primarily women. We now know that that is not entirely true, but it does manifest itself differently, again, because of social conditioning. So in women, it tends to show up as playing small. It's more shrinking behavior. And again, for anybody who's familiar with Brene Brown's work, she talks about the shame trigger for women is not being perfect. So if we think that we're going to get it wrong, we're going to sit quietly on the sidelines and not take that risk. And so, we're not making our voice heard. We're not raising our hand for that next challenge. For men, the shame trigger is not being strong, it's looking weak. So, oftentimes, when you see these kinds of insecurities in men, they show up as more bombastic, overcompensating behaviors, like maybe they double down on their idea and shut down other people's ideas. Maybe they try to make other people look bad in order to make themselves look better. Now, obviously, we're generalizing here. Any person of any gender could engage in either of these behaviors. However, that tends to be a good dividing line, because of that pressure that men feel to always look like they're in control of a situation. So I always try to remind people too that if you see somebody in your environment that is bullying, that they're, flexing their muscles or trying to make people look bad, that's not confidence, right? Because true confidence is quiet. If you know yourself, your capabilities, and where your limitations lie, you don't need to be the smartest person in the room. So when you see that kind of behavior, it's pretty good indication that somebody's struggling with either imposter syndrome or another form of self-doubt.
I've also heard and read that women will not apply for jobs that they don't think that they are qualified for, but men actually will. Would you say that that's a result of imposter syndrome?
Yes, I think that there are a couple of explanations for this. Number one is the imposter syndrome piece and the pressure we put on ourselves to be perfect. The other piece to this, I think, is also a function of research that shows that women are hired on performance and men are hired on potential, right? So I think that women have learned from experience that unless they meet more of the qualifications on a job description, they won't even be considered. And so it doesn't feel worth the time and effort to apply. So I think there are two different angles to that.
Switching gears a little bit, Kim, tell us about your work on the executive committee of the Council for Women of Boston College, the Women Accelerators in WITI.
Yes. So I have been honored to serve in various leadership roles across these women's groups, and I find them to be an incredibly powerful way to be of service to women in my community, but also to learn from and connect with other women. And as an entrepreneur, one of the things that I miss most about my corporate life was having colleagues, was being part of a team, and it can be a lonely endeavor. And so being part of these women's groups gives me the opportunity to build relationships, to also influence programming that I think is going to be valuable to women as they're navigating the various challenges that we're experiencing today, and to just be part of the ongoing mission to create more opportunity and to empower women. Is as much as we're in a time where that's become very politicized, I still do believe that creating environments that are better for women makes the environments better for everybody.
I couldn't agree more. What can we expect to see next from you?
Oh, that is a great question. Thank you. I'm always, it's funny because I wish I had a very specific answer for you, but I will tell you philosophically, I'm always looking for what I consider to be my next Mount Everest, right? Like the big challenge that, and I did a TEDx talk a few years ago. I've been working on new keynotes. So I'm always thinking about what's my next Mount Everest that I want to climb. And I think I'm still working on that right now. So I may have to get back to you on that.
Well, we certainly look forward to talking to you in the future to find out exactly what mountain you've climbed since the time before.
Thank you.
Kim, you're welcome. But thank you so much for joining us on IEEE's Women in Engineering podcast. We appreciate you helping us learn, lead, and inspire in a more impactful way. Because when women rise in STEM, industries shift, power moves, and the world changes. Until next time, Kim and everybody, keep rising.